Hi, Julie. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon.
Great. I'm just pinging Suchi. I think she should be on in a minute or two.
And that's fine.
I'm just checking, Julie, if you're comfortable, if I just send you the Zoom background on email, if you could have that up at your end.
Sure. I've actually never put on a Zoom background, but I will figure it out. So yes,
I
that's
can,
fine.
yes, I'm just sending it to you.
Excellent. Let me get that. Mhm. How's everything going so far from your end?
Going okay. I think we're slightly more calm today because we're through the first day. It's always the first day that's a bit more nerve-wracking, but
Of course.
I think as a team, we're at a better place today.
Good. I'm very glad to hear that.
I just sent it across to you. It should hit your inbox in the next few seconds, and I can just walk
Okay.
you through how to have it up.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I'll just. Oh, okay. Looks like it's.
Hi, Julie.
Hi. Hi. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome back from your vacation, and thank you so much for, knocking the details of the session out soon after.
Of course, thank you for your patience with me.
No, not at all.
Really
If
appreciate it.
we were forewarned, so we had every opportunity to work our schedules around that and account for it. So all good.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you. Just in the process of, I think I can figure out how to do the backdrop on here. Let's see.
There's a small upward arrow next to your video. Perfect.
Excellent.
Awesome. So Cypria, maybe you will walk. I sent this in an email, but just to make sure, walk Julie through the flow. But before we do that, I want to get an important question out of the way, because I think this is the bit that we're the least prepped on. And we're quite confident. We're not too nervous about our ability to sort of handle it on the fly, so to speak. But nevertheless, in the breakout rooms, Julie, we noted the questions, the guiding questions that you have. That I'm assuming you will obviously pose and you will share with people. We'll put it in chat. So Cypria as tech lead, maybe copy the question so you can put it and continue to broadcast it into breakout rooms.
Perfect.
Yes, Ananya, that's something that you'll have to do at your end.
Sorry, I forgot. Ananya's tech lead. Okay, I keep getting that mixed up. Yeah. So Ananya, the questions are on the run of show document. So you just need to make sure you copy it. The links won't copy through in Zoom chat. So, maybe that's not super helpful, but you can share the guiding questions in chat with people in the rooms. But was there any specific expectation, Julie, of us in the room? So it's basically going to be you, Cypria, and myself. There's three of us, and Ananya will assign us. Is there a preference for which room? I know you've said room 1, room 2, room 3. Is there a preference for where you'd like to start, or are you okay with a random assignment?
Random assignment is fine by me. And I was, just to clarify, do we still want to have myself jump from room to room, or do we want to just keep it static for the 35 minutes?
No, so it depends on what you're planning, right? Now, if you want them to respond to that, I guess you'll have to ask the group to pick somebody who will come back in and share in some form, right?
Exactly,
now, I don't know if you want them to do that, or if you want to give them a link to Google Docs. I mean, those are the specific. Just wanted to set a little bit of context about what gender lens investing is, to make sure we kind of all have a similar basic understanding. So I will walk you through that before I hand over to Julie. Right, so this is GenderSmart's sort of context setting definitions around gender lens or GenderSmart investing, right? But it basically is about intentionality, about intentionally incorporating gender-based factors into investment decisions. Right. And as the slide points out, investments analysis needs to focus broadly on addressing gender disparities, on examining gender dynamics so as to better inform investment decisions, and to look at appropriately risk-adjusted returns. Right. So this is GenderSmart's definition. These are the lenses with which they sort of evaluate investment decisions, or what they call the 6 lenses of gender lens investing. So lens 1 is around the role of women in leadership. 2 is around access to capital. 3 is about creating gender equity, right? So creating a level playing field before we can have the equality discussion when it comes to position and pay and inclusion in the workplace. It's about evaluating how products and services benefit women and girls. It's about addressing urgent gender justice and equality issues, as you can see from its inclusion in the word Jedi in their toolkit. And of course, it is about increasing the knowledge and confidence and number of women investors, right? So we get into some detail at this point of time. Yeah, so is this sort of, are these universally accepted principles? I think Julie will walk you through those details, but what we've seen at Andy is that we kind of settle somewhere and you will see a lot of commonality, right? There may be few differences here and there. And as you will see from this slide, which is actually value for women's framework for gender lens investing, it talks about 3 entry points around provision of capital, around the investment of process, and around gender diversity in the firm, right? So you will see that these 3 entry points overlap with the 6 lenses that I just showed you from GenderSmart's point of view. They have 4 lenses that they've built into the provision of capital, right? And I'm not going to go into, and this is from a recently launched report of value for women that's there. But you will see that many of these elements are actually common across the 6 lenses that GenderSmart use in their definition. At Andy, we have a definition for women-led businesses, right? This is another term that you will see us use quite often in the sector. At Andy, we define women-led businesses as those that have a woman in a leadership position with strategic decision-making authority, and having been in this role for at least 1 year, and also meet one of the following criteria, right? The enterprise should be founded and led by a team of at least 50% women, and or 51% or more women own the business, right? Now we can get into the why of it, but broadly speaking, this was put together to try and address the issues, at least in this part of the world, around women owners on paper as against actually leading and owning the business in spirit, right? So irrespective of the different ways or the frameworks that are out there, right? I think one reality is that there is no singular or linear path to investing with the gender lens. There is no one-size-fits-all approach that will fit the needs of all investors. But the definitions around what we want to eventually achieve remain broadly quite consistent, right? So that's a little bit of context setting with which I want to now hand over to Julie. We will do a bit of a slide switch at this point. So Julie, welcome. And maybe while we're changing slides, you can introduce yourself to the group that's here today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that overview of gender lens investing, and I'm very grateful and honored to be speaking at this convening. Thank you all for being here. My name is Julie Labruto. I'm a project lead at GenderSmart, and I co-lead our Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion working group along with Sana Kapadia. And this is what I'm about to present to you reflects about several months, I mean, almost a year of work that we did with the working group to co-create a toolkit to help other investors understand what Jedi investing is, as we call it, and how to integrate that into a gender lens in your investment process. So just very glad to be here. My background is I actually come to investing from the legal field. I was a corporate attorney and moved over into, I also was an entrepreneur and started working in gender lens investing about 2 years ago, and have since then just had the pleasure of working with some amazing people over at GenderSmart Investing. So to kick things off, I wanted to give a quick overview of what GenderSmart is and what we do, just for those of you who might not be familiar with our work. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, I have a bit of an overview. So as you can see on the slide, GenderSmart is a global field building initiative dedicated to unlocking the deployment of strategic, impactful GenderSmart capital at scale. And how does that translate into what we actually do? We are fluent in gender finance and translate insights across asset classes and geographies. So we're a global organization and we aren't specific to any one asset class. And our programming goes from how to get started in gender lens investing to advancing strategies across portfolios. One of our major focuses is connecting senior investment influencers and thought leaders, intermediaries, and experts to the resources, tools, and people they need to advance their work. And at heart, we are a convening organization. We build investor capacity at global summits and working groups and through partnership programming designed around the needs and challenges of the field. And so the Jedi Working Group is one of those working groups as part of the core of our initiative. And so if you want to go to the next slide, the GenderSmart Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Toolkit was, as I mentioned, co-created by the working group members and ourselves. And we really wanted this to be a living document. It's a website, in fact, and or a microsite, as we call it. The idea being that this is something that we can add to over time as this field evolves, because it is a constantly evolving field, and that it can accurately reflect the experiences and knowledge of the members of our working group as those progress. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So I wanted to give some context on what justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion investing, or Jedi investing, is and why it's important. So the working group that we convened around this topic, it began in late 2020, and it started as a series of courageous conversations in the wake of the highly publicized murder of George Floyd in the United States. And we found that in our investment community, people really wanted to talk about this issue and discuss how to best confront what we call justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion investing. And so this field of investing comes at a time of increasing scrutiny for both the systems of finance and the people working within them. As the sector gets more serious about sustainable investing and more nuanced about what that actually means beyond climate factors, this is an opportunity to incorporate a broader diversity lens and improve investment decision-making and outcomes. And I want to point out that, that while this is often talked about in North America with a racial lens, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion is really about providing opportunities for marginalized groups, no matter what that means in different investment contexts. So it could be race or ethnicity, it could be socioeconomic, it is often gender. I mean, the way that we view Jedi investing, gender is naturally integrated within that. It can also be disability, sexual orientation, caste. There's many different filters through which you can identify marginalized populations within your own investment context. So just kind of to give a quick overview, this is, investing in and providing financial capital access for marginalized communities is sorely needed across the world. There's lots of statistics around the world about the very small numbers of investment that marginalized people receive. You know, there's statistics in the UK that Black women receive 0.02% of capital, which is a grand total of 16 women, Black women. There's in the US tons of statistics about Black, Latino, and Indigenous founders receiving less than 1% of total VC investment. If you look at the public markets, the number of Black, female, or Indigenous senior executives is close to zero. Just across the board, this is a huge issue, and it translates into loss of GDP in countries around the world. I mean, the impact of the lack of funding for marginalized communities is really far-reaching. And I'm sure you all have in your own contexts examples that you can cite where you see very low investment. So Jedi investing is increasingly being used to reflect a deeper, rigorous, and intersectional approach towards embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion into your organization, strategies, and investments. And so the lens that we've chosen to apply in our first version of the Jedi Toolkit focuses on racial ethnic justice and its regional equivalent. But as I said, we want to point out that these principles can also be applied regardless of the lens of diversity that you are using in your investment process. So Jedi investing is about who's investing, who receives investment, what results occur, how those investments or investment terms are structured, and how those decisions are made. So your Jedi approach could be either integrated or intentional. Some investors make gender and Jedi principles part of their overall investment thesis, which would be integrated. Others take an intentional approach that focuses on specific gender and Jedi levers, for example, funding more gender diverse fund managers or something like that. And just what this means across asset classes or use cases. All actors can apply a Jedi lens to their work and their practices, but the primary users of this toolkit are intended to be allocators, intermediaries, and other investment influencers, either in the public or the private market, family offices, private equity funds, or venture fund investors, foundations, also consultants, gender experts, other social justice experts. But really it can be, these are universal. This can also be used by entrepreneurs. Whatever hat you wear, you can use a Jedi lens. So the way that this gets applied, it also depends on where the investor sits in terms of mainstream orientation or impact orientation in their investments. Many mainstream investors build a Jedi lens into their existing DEI frame. Impact investors tend to prefer broader buckets of social justice and equity investing, and these strategies can span focusing on funding underrepresented or diverse fund managers or organizations. It can be funding diverse entrepreneurs, or it can be investing specifically in critical consumer services that directly benefit underrepresented population segments. And I just want to quickly touch on how this fits into that broader gender lens investing that we saw at the beginning of this session. So GLI, or gender lens investing, is the process of integrating gender as a factor of analysis into the investment process, as we discussed. This is also the kickoff point for embedding a deeper Jedi investing approach, which goes beyond just gender equity to address power dynamics across the different divides in terms of access to investment. So the Jedi lens does not deprioritize gender. It instead builds on the momentum of gender lens investing. It's not a distinct asset class. It's an investment approach that cuts across asset classes. And gender and Jedi are really interconnected. You don't lose an opportunity by adding a Jedi lens. You don't lose your GLI lens. Instead, they're intersectional. Just wanted to touch on that. Sorry, that was a long-winded explanation of what Jedi investing is, but we can go to the next slide now. So we are very excited to share the link to the toolkit in the chat right now, and you can feel free to follow along as I discuss the different action pathways that we've created within this toolkit. So you should find the link in the chat now. Next slide. So these are our Jedi investing principles. This is the framework which we've used for the entire toolkit. And so these principles, their process and use cases, we'll take a closer look at on the following slides. But as I mentioned, I just want to, at the outset, say that these principles are intended to be universal. So whether you're an intermediary, an investor, or an entrepreneur, these are all ways to think about Jedi investing. And so we'll go through them in the way that we've outlined in the toolkit, broken down by different investor journeys. Next slide, please. All right, so first, the first pathway that the Jedi Toolkit offers is for those looking to get started. And these are those who are looking to develop a foundational understanding of core gender and Jedi investing tools and concepts. So this is really, this is that first entry point for people. And I think there's a link that you'll be able to see and follow along. And so in this pathway, we focus on the first three Jedi investing principles. There's awareness, which is the recognition and acknowledgement of current financial and economic systems, that they're founded and hence affected by a spectrum of systemic and other historical and geographic factors such as racism, discrimination, colonialism, creating power, and structural imbalances. In the investment process, this would be, you'd start by understanding that gender and race disaggregated data impacts investment decisions, for example, refine your investment thesis to address deeper social contexts in which the investments are made. And as an organization, it would be about being clear on your why, having clarity on how the organization's mission is grounded or influenced by Jedi concepts, and aligning on the risks, continually building awareness of the risks of not paying attention to a gender and Jedi lens. Next, we have specificity, tailoring investment strategy and approach to reflect geographical and socioeconomic dynamics. And what this means in the investment process is tailoring, for example, tailoring the investment process with a contextually relevant gender and Jedi lens, or using specific relevant ethnicity or racial or other data indicators along the investment process, from sourcing to screening to selection and post-investment support. As an organization, this would be a deep dive on the implications of systemic issues. A nuanced understanding of these factors can support more targeted strategies, and also developing context-specific policies and interventions. And then next we have participation, striving for participation of all voices and actors, supported by thorough and locally relevant investment and organizational processes. What this can mean in an investment context is ensuring representative investment decision-making bodies and processes. This would potentially include venture associates, relevant community stakeholders, previously funded founders, et cetera. These are all ways to enable balanced investment decisions, and also exploring non-traditional ways of assessing track record. So existing financial industry due diligence standards continue to limit the flow of funds towards diverse and underrepresented fund managers. So examining how your processes are affecting participation. So, and then if you take a look at this this tab on our toolkit, you'll also see links to the foundations of gender lens investing, how these can be used to embed a deeper Jedi focus, an asset class framework, and other resources as well. Next slide, please. So for those investors with some experience of Jedi investing with a gender lens, we have the section looking for those to level up this other pathway. So in this pathway, we focus on the next two Jedi investing principles. First, intentionality. This defines the baseline and then sets progress goals and a bigger vision around Jedi's transformative potential for results and or impact. In the investment process, this could look like defining clear and transparent, measurable and timely gender and Jedi investing goals, or acknowledging that Jedi actions can be both inward and outward facing. So how the capital gets allocated, as well as the organization's own Jedi work in any action plans. As an organization, you might be defining goals around key activities or aligning on the risks, continually building awareness of the risks of not paying attention to gender and Jedi. Implementation is the other principle in this section. So ensuring the Jedi and the gender and Jedi investing approach has widespread buy-in and accountability is built in. So in the investment process, this might be about shifting the investment policy with a clear gender and Jedi set of goals, outlining how the allocation could shift away from extractive sectors, align with racial justice or other goals, and target underrepresented funds or racial justice funds or things like that and opportunities. As an organization, it's about creating an inclusive culture. Starting by providing safe sharing spaces, offering anti-bias training in how to address the sort of everyday prejudices that influence our thought processes, and also articulating the importance of Jedi to your organization and how it aligns with your core values so that everyone understands the why behind why you're doing this. In addition to these principles, the Level Up Pathway has other measurement indicators and frameworks, and gives those working in private capital different resources to refine their process, along with a due diligence database, which has a compendium of due diligence questions that you're free to use. Okay, and the next slide, we have the final pathway, which is go further. For those experienced in Jedi and gender lens investing who are seeking transformational impact, that's the go further pathway. So these are the final two Jedi investing principles. They are accountability, which is monitoring milestones and progress against concrete goals and allocation volumes, referring to measurable benchmarks and other industry standards. So in the investment process, this is, for example, being transparent and accountable about the gender and Jedi process, outlining and disseminating the Jedi commitment and allocation goals, and demonstrating explicit divestment strategies, investment areas reached, and other results on a regular basis. As an organization, this would be about building accountability into internal processes. So tracking internal hiring and promotion statistics by gender and race or other markers of marginalization, ethnicity, et cetera, or making compensation structures transparent and available to all, for example. And then finally, iteration. So integrate feedback loops and commit to building a cohesive culture of reflection, accountability, and action over the long term. This is in part about tracking progress and measuring your goals, but also considering shifts in power dynamics inside the organization and out. In the investment process, you'd be tracking and adjusting your portfolio or approach with an iterative lens, building continuous learning about what peers are doing, assessing how any insights that you've had as an organization might translate to the investment process, et cetera. And as an organization, fostering transparent and iterative systems that ensure that Jedi is not siloed in the hiring process or other functional areas, but that it cuts across the various levels of the organization. And there's many other resources that you'll find at that link for Go Further. But I also just want to reiterate that these principles, that we've broken them down by where you are on your journey, all of these principles, they're intended to be a circle. And so you could be referencing any of these principles in any order, however they make sense for you and your organization. And in fact, as iteration would imply, going back to previous principles that you may have already looked at your organization through, and seeing how they've changed over time. And I wonder if I'll ask the Andy team, but if now might be a good time to pause for some questions before we dive into the case studies. Just let me know if that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense, Julie, because I think that's a lot of information.
That was a lot, yeah.
for people to digest. And Ananya just flagging that maybe we would want to have that up, but we will. I see a few questions already, Julie, and I'll read them out to you. Question one is, how long can an organization stay in the intentional phase? And the second is, what resources are needed to push those organizations to integrate the Jedi framework? This is from Shantanu. So maybe you can address them both together before we move to the next.
Sure, absolutely. So the first question, how long would an organization stay really at any of these stages? It really depends on your own context and your goals, and how far, whether your impact lenses can naturally lend themselves to Jedi investing, or if this is a new process that you really have to set in place. We like to say that it's not a race, that, obviously everyone wants to be at the end goal as quickly as possible. But if this is a process that evolves over time, and it looks different for every organization. And so it might be something that's very simple for one group to slot onto their existing processes, and it might take a really long time for another group to make the kinds of deep and lasting changes that aren't just a wash over your PR approach, but are actually part of the core of your organization. So I don't think it's fair to say that there's a length of time that this should take, just as long as the progress is moving forward, and people in the organization have true buy-in as to what the goals are. then you will see progress over time. And as long as I said, as long as that is a deep and lasting change, let it go at your own pace. And it might be that your own version of Jedi looks very different from another organization's version. And that's, it's extremely context specific. It's extremely specific to the kinds of investing that you're doing. And so it's very helpful to benchmark against other organizations or to look at what other people are doing, but at the same time recognizing that this is it's a very individually tailored process. And I'm sorry, what was the second question? I've already forgotten.
The second was, what resources are needed to push organizations to integrate a Jedi framework?
Right. The resources that are needed, I would say it's really about making sure that the decision makers across the board are convinced as to why this is important. And I think that is actually the single most important thing. There are obviously, there's plenty of resources that exist that we link to in the toolkit that can be a sort of primer on various aspects or sample documents to help get you started in actually drafting your processes. And other organizations will have those sort of benchmarking, those quantitative breakdowns of, how much of your investments should be for X or Y. But really what it's about is getting your senior management to truly understand why this is important and to commit to doing it in the long term. And that's honestly probably the most challenging part. Everything else you can figure out. That's not totally true. It's also challenging in certain moments. I don't want to undersell it, but making sure that you have buy-in across the organization. And to do that, we have on the Jedi Toolkit, we have fact sheets and things like that in our and case studies as well in our resources to help you sell why Jedi investing is important in your context. But hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Julie. The next question is there a verification process for application of this toolkit?
A third-party verification process. I'm not I haven't myself, I can't think of one right now that can do this for you. But there are metrics and markers that you can use. I know that the 2X Collaborative is launching a 2X Plus process and measurement toolkit. And I'm not sure when that is being launched, but there are groups that will help you benchmark yourself, but I don't know if there's a third-party verification process specifically for Jedi investing.
Thanks, Julie. And since you did speak about the 2X Collaborative, and many folks here may or may not know, maybe you can take a minute or two to explain what the 2X Collaborative is trying to do and how it fits within the GenderSmart work.
Absolutely. So the 2X Collaborative is an organization that was founded to help DFIs and multilateral development banks and other government actors to really start moving capital with a gender lens. And so it set really ambitious goals for how much capital to move. And that goal has consistently gone up, which is very satisfying. And they're really, trying to move the needle on gender lens investing. And so that was a challenge that 2X had launched. Now 2X is transforming into the 2X Collaborative, which is another field building organization, really focused on convening, again, the experts in the field who are already working in gender lens investing or who are interested in getting started to create a space for the higher level individuals, but also the other people in the organization to learn more about gender lens investing. And that's something that GenderSmart has decided to come together with 2X on. And so we'll be working on those initiatives together in the future. Our organizations are merging. So all the work that you see from GenderSmart will be integrated into the 2X Collaborative in the future. And that's a membership organization that will have these resources and knowledge sharing and just assistance in gender lens investing and Jedi investing more broadly as well.
Thanks, Julie. And I will share the 2X Collaborative link to the website as well in chat
you.
in a bit. But the next question is, do you have a framework that will help evaluate which pathway we have to choose?
So it's not exactly, we don't have it set up as a static sort of, here's where you belong on your journey. As I mentioned, it's more about the principles and how they can apply to your work at any point in time. So we broke it down this way because it was a helpful way to sort of envision the process and where you might want to start thinking about these principles. But really, I think if you spend some time with the principles, it will become apparent to you which ones are most resonant in your moment, in your context. And if, I think reading through the Getting Started is just a good place to start for anyone. If this is all seeming very familiar and you're not really, you're already doing all of the things that are referenced in that section, then move on to going further and seeing if that might fit a little bit better. But we don't have a quiz or anything like that. It's really getting to know those principles and seeing where can I plug in different pieces at different moments for my work.
Thanks, Julie. That's the last question that I see at this point. So maybe we can move in. And of course, just a reminder to all participants that the idea of a workshop is for this to be more two-way rather than one way, of course, within the constraints of doing this virtually. So please do keep the questions coming, because toolkits, tools, frameworks are only as good as your ability to be able to use them. And we want to be able to demystify that over here. So do keep the questions coming and we will try and address them before we go into breakouts. But Julie, back to you for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you so much. I know, and I am just talking at you for a long time here, but I do want this to be a conversation that we can have. So in the slide deck, if you wouldn't mind flying that back up. So we have case studies, as I mentioned, in the toolkit. And what I would like to spend some time with you on in breakout sessions coming up is looking at a few of these case studies and seeing how they might resonate for you in your own context. And so we've pulled out 3 case studies from the toolkit. There are more in there, but these are the ones that we're going to focus on today. So first we have the Visa Foundation and their Equitable Access Initiative that was launched in April 2020. So in this initiative, the way that they have applied a Jedi lens is across the investment value chain, from the ownership, management, and governance of fund managers through to the small businesses that the funds invests in and the end customers reached by those businesses. So their goal is to increase capital allocation to diverse fund managers who in turn invest in diverse entrepreneurs. The foundation's approach in this is with 2 ways. One, they invest directly in first-time and diverse fund managers, and they also use their capital to influence a shift within larger funds that may not be very diverse. So they're committed to creating a delta change in their organizational diversity by bringing in, for example, female partners, applying a gender lens to their investment strategy, collecting gender disaggregated data, et cetera. And that's through a 5-year, $200 million strategic commitment, $60 million of that being in grants and $140 million in impact investments. So this approach cuts across all stages of the investment process, from selection to due diligence, agreements, et cetera. And they currently are using side letters to embed commitments related to impact and diversity, and as well as being open to using other tools over time. They plan to collect impact data across investments on gender diversity at the fund level, for US funds at the racial diversity level, and the number of diverse businesses supported, and the performance of those businesses over time. So for example, through jobs or revenue, et cetera. And so I think we have a link to that case study that you can read more about what they're doing to apply a Jedi lens. Thank you. All right, and we can, I think we can move on to the next slide. And we'll talk about Alcazar Impact. So they are co-creating a very unique place-based investing model to address systemic issues of underinvestment across India, Nepal, and Bhutan, as well as other regions. Looking at these systemic issues of underinvestment, for example, the fact that 92% of all foreign direct investment in India is invested in 5 out of 29 states. So they saw this and realized that they wanted to create find a way to empower the local ecosystem which is both a sound investment economic proposition and a necessary precondition to building longer lasting peace and prosperity. For example, the victims of war and violence are disproportionately women. The lack of local opportunities is most intensely experienced by women who are not encouraged to enter entrepreneurship or the workforce. So this is a way of addressing those issues. It focuses on otherwise marginalized groups, particularly in women. That's the core of their investment approach. And they work with Native populations in these regions to support entrepreneurial capacity, enable increased formalization of business models, and increase the growth of investable social enterprises. Their impact outlook focuses on female ownership, employment generation, and climate risks as key principles. And they take a deep layered approach. This encompasses multi-year support and comprehensive advisory support and helping entrepreneurs become investment ready, often seeding their rounds or supporting them in their first capital raise. And thank you. There's a link in the chat to that full case study. And finally, our third case study is global partnerships. So global partnerships mission is to expand opportunity for people living in poverty. And the poverty profile of their constituents, the constituents they serve, was their entry point into thinking about inclusion. So they set out to understand context-specific and multidimensional natures of poverty in the countries in which they invest. So they take an in-depth country-level research exploring the intersection of poverty, race, and ethnicity in each of the more than 20 countries where their funds invest to create their version of what Jedi means. So it's a highly localized, highly context-specific definition of marginalization based on poverty in the countries that they're investing in. So this can include gender, geography, race, ethnicity, all different intersectional drivers of exclusion is where they use their lens. So through desk research and dialogue with current and prospective social enterprise partners, they found that social enterprise approaches exist on a continuum for them. It's from those that have a mandated approach. They explicitly aim to serve constituents marginalized. An intentional approach, those that recognize either race or ethnicity or other dimensions of marginalization as their target segments. And a neutral approach, those that don't articulate any marginalization as part of their investment strategy. So they took these research insights, they heightened their team's awareness, and global partnerships impact underwriting is now informed by an even more nuanced and contextualized understanding of the multifaceted drivers of exclusion in the countries where global partnership affiliated funds invest. So the way they do this, the team starts with inquiry, asking questions such as what marginalized communities and groups does your enterprise aim to serve? And how do you take the needs, preferences, and behaviors of those marginalized communities into account when designing your products and services? They use poverty outreach as an initial screening criterion and then apply deeper intersectional lenses. So the GP team asks social enterprise partners about their approach to serving those further marginalized by additional aspects of identity, using country-specific context to help guide their approach. And finally, Global Partnerships marries this inquiry-based approach with disciplined measurement practices, understanding that both quantitative and qualitative data are needed to assess an enterprise's capacity to deepen inclusion. So this is a very integrated approach that they've taken and research-based. So these are 3 very different ways that you can apply a Jedi lens in different contexts. As I mentioned before, it's a very individualized process depending on your organization's current processes and their goals. And there's lots of different ways to achieve those goals. So these are 3 examples. And what we're going to do in our breakout rooms, which I think, is it 25 minutes for breakouts?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. So we are going to divide everyone into 3 rooms, and each room will have one of these case studies as their entry point to start a conversation. So if we can pull up, there's a slide with some questions on it that I want everyone to be considering in these breakout rooms. I think the format for them will be within the rooms, take a few minutes at the beginning to look at the link for your for the case study that your group is looking at, and just read through it and get a little bit more familiar with what the case study says, and then use that information to have a conversation about the questions are coming up, but basically it's what stood out to you from that case study, what's resonating in your context, and what questions you have that the group can maybe work through, and how you could use this as a model or reference this in your own investment context, and also what challenges you see, how this is what's not resonating, why you think there's elements of it that might not work for you, and the goal being to just kind of think through how you can apply a Jedi lens in your own work. And also maybe if everyone in the breakout groups can just start with a quick introduction of themselves, but when they before they start speaking, so we can all get to know each other a bit. But so I will be in one of these breakout rooms. The Andy team will be in the other 2 to help with this process, and then we'll come back at the end and we'll report back on what we discussed in our breakout rooms.
Thanks, Julie. Just going to pause now if there are, see if there are any questions around the logistics of the breakout rooms. Want to make sure everybody's understood what is needed of you. Of course, like Julie said, you'll have one of us in each of the rooms, so you can still ask those questions there. But before Ananya puts us into the 3 breakout rooms, I want to create some space here for any clarification questions. Okay, I'm going to take that few seconds pause to mean that we're all good and we can go into breakout rooms. So Ananya, over to you. Please send us to our breakout rooms. Yes, Hema, you will get time to read the case study. I shared the links based on which room you get assigned to. I will share the relevant link again, which you can click through to. And of course, we'll make a call based on how many have access if you want me to share screen and spend time. But yeah, that's the long answer. The short answer is yes, you will get time to read. Thanks. Ananya, go ahead. All right, catch you everybody on the other side in 25 minutes.
Welcome back, everyone. I think that would be a great time to just go to each of the different breakout rooms and give a quick feedback as to what was discussed. I was supposed to have appointed someone to do this recap for my group, but we got into talking and I didn't, so I'll do the recap myself, and that's absolutely fine. We had a great conversation. Our group focused on the Visa Foundation case study. But we quickly just started talking about, the things that are coming up in our different contexts, and, challenges and questions that the group had. So we spent a little bit of time talking about the 2X criteria and what that looks like, and how you can modify the 2X criteria for a Jedi context. The 2X criteria being a set of criteria with thresholds for gender lens investing, that kind of walks through different ways that you can evaluate an investment as to their GLI strategy, and give specific numerical thresholds for those. So a lot of people we've seen have found that really useful as a jumping off point to figuring out how to integrate a Jedi lens into their process. We talked also about how what came up quickly and seemed to resonate with a lot of the group was pipeline issues that people have. That there's a desire to bring marginalized people or women into the organization, into the workforce. But depending on the positions that you're hiring for, you might not even get anyone applying for those positions, or you might have trouble finding qualified people. And so we walked through different ways that you could mitigate that challenge. Whether it's, looking at your job descriptions to see if are you unintentionally weeding out the people that you're seeking by putting requirements into your job description that people from those groups are unlikely to be able to meet. And are there other ways of getting to the elements that you're really trying to focus on, but also looking at what's stopping them from applying in the first place. Is it a deep-seated cultural mindset, or is it something that can be more flexible? So for example, can you shift the timings of your work day? Can you offer childcare? Can you let people work from home? Are these the things that are actually barriers to your pipeline? And really quickly also just pointed out that in the Visa Foundation case study, they mentioned consulting experts in social justice and in investment domains to build their strategy. And this was something that resonated with some of the members of the group as something that they would want to do in their own context as well. I know we're short on time, so I'll leave it there. But if group 2 wants to go.
Jonita, that's you.
Sure. Yes, thanks. Thanks so much, Sucharita, and thank you, Julie. So our group looked at the Alsasa impact case study, which focused on the Jedi investing approach. And it looked at, and we had examples of an organization, Fast Beetle, which is based out of Jammu and Kashmir, and the other is Naga Ed, which is based out of Nagaland in India as well. It really, the few things that kind of stood out to our group was that, implementation being, having a multi-year kind of approach is something that is important, and we often don't see that in the sector. Also providing an incubation ecosystem for marginalized groups vis-a-vis urban incubation is also an essential aspect that often gets overlooked. The inclusion of marginalized women, of course, being an important aspect in it. And one of the things I think our group also kind of had was the case study brought about more questions as well in our mind. And so even from the things that stood out, we did have questions. Some of them were kind of to understand how do we change mindsets? And I think that kind of becomes a very important part of the work that we're doing, especially in this part of the world, changing mindsets and being aware of, the kind of businesses they're like that are being supported. Additionally to that, I think a very important aspect is also to kind of keep an eye out for how, to what extent, especially when we say gender inclusive or diverse, not falling prey to pinkwashing or greenwashing or any of those things, just not just ticking boxes. And a very important aspect that came up in the discussion was because the toolkit is more like a guidance in a sense, and everyone can adopt it into whatever works best for them in their context. It's important to kind of figure out how we are kind of being accountable to the toolkit as well. So that's one of the points that came up. And I think in terms of questions, of course, we were very curious to know how Alsisa actually applied the toolkit, which pathway it took. So that would have been, really helpful for us to kind of contextualize the use of the toolkit. And yeah, I mean, it's a lot of different points, but I think the general gist of it, at least, I've done my best to share it here. But I would say if anyone from the group feels I missed out anything, just please put it in the chat. So yeah, so that's all from group 2.
That's wonderful. That sounds like a really rich conversation that you had. And I just want to say, if anyone has any questions that they want to direct to me, I'm happy to field those. You can reach out to the Andy team, and I'm sure they can pass along my email address. And group 3.
Yes, that is going to be me. I was met with quite a lot of silence when I asked for volunteers, so I volunteered as tribute to share what we did discuss. I think I'm not going to repeat a lot of what was already covered. I think just in terms of what stood out, what came through was the way that the toolkit had divided into mandated, intentional, and neutral groups, or the global partnerships team had sort of divided that. So I think that was something that stood out in terms of their approach, and also the fact that the tool looks at geography as well as one of the lenses, and given that some of the partners who were in the particular room work primarily in metro cities and large cities, and sometimes it's a struggle to sort of go beyond that main area of operations. So kind of explicitly adding that as a lens, I think really helps them be more inclusive even in terms of their programming. So that was something that came through. I think in terms of a lot of questions came up that they wanted to discuss, which is, I think one of the most important ones was, when you're working with any country or with any context to kind of fit this particular toolkit, what about the sustainability of it, right? Like after you kind of go through that initial process of figuring out the pathway, etc., how can you hold someone accountable or hold the organization accountable to really inculcate this into their approach as they basically sort of going on year on year? And I think another question that came up again is there are quite a lot of toolkits, metrics, indicators. How do you evaluate what works best for that particular context, for the region, for the program? Is there some kind of a baseline that you start off with and then kind of continue building on? So yeah, I think those are the main points. Happy to have someone from the team jump in if they think I missed anything.
Thank you so much. So I'm hearing across the groups, there's a lot of conversations about shifting mindsets, about specificity, accountability, finding frameworks to get started. And these are all issues that come out across all the conversations that we've been having on this topic. And we do have resources on the Jedi Investing Toolkit website that will hopefully help with making the case. We have data sheets and things like that that can get you started on that. And also for other frameworks that people in our working group have found useful when they're implementing this work. But those all sounded like really great conversations. I wish I could have been in all of them, but thank you all for sharing.
Great, thanks, Julie. Time for me to step in. I think, Ananya, you have feedback, a feedback poll that you want to share from folks before they start dropping off. So please do take a minute to fill this out so we know kind of what worked, what didn't work, what we can do better. And while that poll is running, I will thank you all very much for your active participation. Julie, thank you very much for taking the time and trouble to put these case studies together and to be here today. We hope that we can continue to work with you around Jedi and everything that GenderSmart is doing beyond that with relevant folks in the region going forward as well. Thanks very much, everyone. Before you drop off, please be kind enough to fill out that poll for us.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Julie. Poll done. So thank you. And this was a really great session. I love the interactiveness of it. All right, bye.
Thanks so much. Bye. Right, Julie, we can, I think, sign off because we've ended the poll. Thanks again, and we'll look forward to being in touch with you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. It was a
Thank
really
you.
good-
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.